Okay, we're going to get started, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in the Ski Area Climate Advocacy session. I'm Courtney LaBrie, the Director of Sustainability at the National Ski Areas Association, and I am losing my voice right now, so if at any point you can't hear me in the back, just raise your hand and I will try and talk a little bit louder. But for those of you who are not familiar with NSAA, we are the business voice of the ski industry, and we represent different ski areas and suppliers located across the country. So climate change is a huge threat to the ski industry. And while we work on both mitigation and resiliency measures, advocacy is an incredibly important part of the work we do to raise the collaborative business voice of the ski industry for broad-scale climate action at the federal level. So NSAA has been a leader in federal climate advocacy for years. We work on a variety of different bipartisan solutions, including things like the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Prove It Act, and different things like permitting reform and transmission as well. Additionally, NSAA works with a variety of partners, including groups like CCL and Ceres, to get that combined effort and impact across the country as well. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Ceres is a nonprofit advocacy organization that works to accelerate the transition to a cleaner, more just, and sustainable economy. And although NSAA works at the federal level, we also work with the state associations that are located in every state where there are ski areas. And we, of course, work with individual ski areas across the country to provide resources and as many opportunities for collaboration as possible. Because ski areas are doing a ton of great work in the climate advocacy realm in a variety of different ways, many of which we're going to talk about in this discussion coming up. So I'm so excited to introduce our wonderful group of panelists here. So starting here is Mike Nathan, the Sustainability Manager at Arapahoe Basin Ski Area located in Colorado. Mike leads the resort's strategic sustainability plan and their grassroots program to create a genuine culture of sustainability at a basin. He's pioneered renewable energy and electric vehicle infrastructure projects, championed the resort's waste reduction program, and in 2023 helped the ski area achieve carbon neutrality. So next is Don Boulware, the Vice President of Social and Environmental Responsibility at Taos Ski Valley. Don has worked in the industry for 30 years and leads Taos in their impactful sustainability work. Taos was the first ski resort in the world to become a certified B Corporation and is a certified carbon neutral company on their way to becoming net zero by 2030. And then finally is Bonnie Hickey, the Director of Sustainability at Bridger Bowl Ski Area in Montana, where Bonnie oversees Bridger Bowl's award-winning sustainability program. Motivated by its longstanding commitment to stewardship of Montana's natural resources, Bridger Bowl has gained national attention for their advocacy work in renewable energy, climate change, waste reduction, and pollution prevention. So all of the ski areas on this panel are real leaders in the advocacy realm and are doing very impactful work. They're always willing to collaborate with NSAA and other organizations to share best practices and share their insights into this work. And although they aren't up here on the panel, I also want to recognize that there are some members of the Mountain Collaborative for Climate Action in the room today. So this is a group made up of Vail Resorts, Alterra, Boyne Resorts, and Powder. And they're all also committed to progressing sustainability and climate initiatives. And they're also very active in the climate advocacy realm. So I'm going to ask them to kind of chime in on a couple of the questions today as well. So with that, thank you all so much for being here. And I do want to make one logistical note. We would love this to be as conversational as possible. So throughout our discussion, if you would like to add something in, feel free to raise your hand, ask our panelists, and we will also save time for some Q&A at the end. So with that, to start things off, I'd love to ask our panelists and hear from each of you, what's your approach to climate advocacy at your ski area, and why does this matter to your ski area? So maybe Mike, you want to start?
So I'm Mike Nathan from Arapahoe Basin. I think we're going to get into a lot of the specifics of the things we've done, wins and losses, some of the headwinds we face. But I guess leading into that, I'd say we do try to come at it from pretty much every angle, from a very high level federal and state approach, as well as a much more local, hands-on in our community with all of our planning groups in Summit County. And even more hyper-local than that within our staff group. You know, I think we all acknowledge that advocacy and the broader changes in our society is what we need to achieve some of the climate wins that we all need to, you know, keep skiing viable, more or less, and keep our mountain towns viable. We really lean into still focusing on the ground work. You know, in the intro for myself that Courtney just read, you know, so much of what we do with the Basin is really trying to develop that culture of sustainability amongst employees because, you know, as ski area operators, I think we have a pretty unique place in this whole advocacy and climate policy world. You know, we have a really diverse set of employees from, you know, people like myself who have a sustainability background to diesel mechanics and folks who make snow and work all night. So the more that we can do tangible things and have those folks be champions of really cool, innovative, you know, climate positive projects, the more we think we're going to slowly turn the gears in their minds when it comes for them to, you know, vote or implement these things out in their communities. So, yeah, we'll get into a bunch more of what we do, but yeah, that's something the Basin's after.
So I think Courtney already talked about really relying on the National Ski Areas Association on the federal level. On the state, we've developed numerous partnerships, and then locally, whether it's what we can do within our business with our staff members, just as we're learning, they're learning. Our staff are in it every day, and they come up with great solutions as well. So, and want to share like what they think is important to advocate for. So, and with our guests, right, we can also be it's a two-way street, whether our guests say this is important to us or whether our guests, we're helping inform what's going on. So I think there's different levels and different levels you lean into, but it's always a conversation, whether it's with NSAA, whether it's something with perhaps other ski areas in our region, or something happening at the state level that is important for our operations. So I would say it's varied depending on what we're looking at.
Thank you. I'm Bonnie from Bridger Bowl in Montana. And I guess I came into advocacy because I didn't know otherwise when I took on the job of sustainability about 6 years ago at Bridger Bowl. It was just an assumption on my part that organizations advocated for their needs in their community. And so jumped into that with the help of these people here that are my fellow panelists and many others in this room. And through their mentoring, kind of went down this road. And, you know, I think it's a little bit different for my ski area compared to theirs because Bridger Bowl is a nonprofit ski area. One of very few in the nation. It's the second largest. We've got representatives from Basin here in Boise, who is the largest nonprofit. Yay, there you are. And so our work is very definitely nonpartisan and issue-oriented. And so again, just as Don was speaking to, the issues may be very localized, or the issues could be jumping in and joining NSAA in some of the bigger advocacy efforts like the Big Wires Act. So.
Yeah, great. Thank you all for sharing those perspectives. So moving on to talking about successes, I would love it if each of you could share a successful or impactful climate advocacy initiative that your ski area has undertaken. And if there are any specific factors that you think made this successful, to share that as well, please. So yeah, Dawn, go for it.
I think something we really had some success around was helping advocate in New Mexico for the Clean Fuel Standards Act. So we're the fourth state to pass a Clean Fuel Standards Act, and it came about, our advocacy came about really part of the Mountain Collab, and having conversations that Bonnie was leading on HVO, renewable diesel, and really wanting to have that as a resource for us. And then what we did, one, to learn about it, New Mexico is a very heavy oil and gas state, and we knew one of the producers in the southern part of the state was producing HVO, but it was all being shipped to the West Coast because of all the incentives. So we kind of started there, and then started reaching out to the Environment Department, and it just kind of created a conversation, and then the Environment Department asked us to write a letter of support because they were trying to get it passed in that legislative session last winter. So I helped write an op-ed, and then we reached out. One of our state representatives was helping lead the bill in our state Senate, and so reached out to them to make sure they knew that we supported it. And then I think once it did pass, it's also going back and thanking all the folks who helped pass it. And I think that's a really important piece, is because I'm sure I've not ever been an elected official, and if there are in here, I'm sure they probably hear more people complaining versus like thanking them for the legislation. So that was a really important part too. So I would highlight that from last year as being one of our big successes.
I guess, as we're moving on here, I know a lot of people in the room I recognize as very active advocates, but are there people in the room that are just entering into this realm? No, everybody's, a few, okay. Just knowing who our audience is. When I stepped into this role at Bridger, one of my first efforts was, along with C.J. Pitcher from Discovery Mountain, was to approach our Montana Ski Areas Association to get their endorsement for the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. So that was an early success, and I think the fact that we were able to walk into a room of Montana ski areas and gain that endorsement really was empowering to me to move forward. And more recently, well, coming from Montana, the successes come few and far between, I have to say. But more recently, we approached the Department of Environmental Quality and asked them to commit to a notice of intent to participate in the EPA's climate pollution prevention grant program. And in order to do that, they needed to create a climate plan. And I think what made it successful is they took it back to the public and asked businesses and organizations to contribute their ideas of what that would look like. And so they were able to use the tools of that cities and counties and other businesses were able to provide of how they developed their own climate plans. And although it wasn't as comprehensive as we would have liked to have seen, they did submit the climate plan and the notice of intent, and that's going to enable Montana to utilize that funding for really important infrastructure projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of hard to know that like a Basin or any of us can claim success, but there's been a lot of successes lately that I think we've all been a part of, from the very biggest bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA, down to more state level stuff. We advocated for the advanced clean trucking rule in Colorado, which did pass last fall, or yeah, I guess about a year ago now. So that was obviously really good. And again, do we think that ruling may have passed without a Basin, putting out some statements in the newspaper and signing on to an op-ed with Aspen? Frankly, probably, right? We're in a pretty good place in Colorado right now. But I think it continues to be really important that logos like a Basin show up on these letterheads every time it comes across the governor or the legislators' desks. And so that's why we continue to do it, even if it sometimes is hard to be able to pat yourself solely on the back for it. The fact that collectively these things are passing and that so many people are getting behind them, and we just happen to be, one bit of that, I think is a huge success that we continue to celebrate.
Yeah, thank you all. And Don, that point about thanking people, I think, is so valuable, because you're right, we need to show that, you know, you supported it, and we're very thankful for that. So yeah, I just wanted to call that out. Great point, and thank you for all those perspectives. I would like to ask if any of the members of the Mountain Collab in the room, though, have any examples of successful initiatives that you'd be willing to share. Don.
Yeah, success in advocacy is hard, and I would never. It's hard. So success is just doing the effort, I feel, more than anything,
Yeah.
and being okay with the results. Because if you're not, if success is only a bill getting passed or regulation being in front, getting done, then it's like it's deflating sometimes, I guess. But so kind of similar to the Clean Truck Act, we have 3 resorts in Maine, so we're big players in the Maine kind of economy, and so we signed on, and the Clean Car Act did an op-ed. And chances that it was going to pass were very slim, but us being involved spoke volumes, and kind of did an op-ed to say, yeah, we don't buy cars as a ski resort, but we're going to make sure we have the infrastructure for electric cars. So I think we have 60 charging stations between the 3 resorts. So yeah, you can do this, and we'll support that as a big customer. I think is Lizzie here? I think Lizzie, you here? She was here. But anyways, in Montana, and Bonnie was involved with this one. There was a bunch of conveners to I always wrong words, not sue the Public Service Commission. Well, ultimately. Yeah, ultimately. But was to put a price on carbon for their decision making on new carbon-based facilities. And I think that's the success was getting the organizations comfortable with going forward with it. It's a big, right? There's a hearing, you got to testify. That can be scary, and it might not pass, but the success was getting in front of the Public Service Commission and voicing everybody's opinion and say, we want these things. And 40 organizations doing it, that's a success to me. If it ever gets a carbon price in Montana, probably unlikely. Optimism. So yeah, I think that's yeah. No, that's a success for me. Get in front of them and say, hey, no, this is what the community wants. Is a big deal. So, and being a partner with Bridger and a couple other organizations was pretty impactful. So, yeah.
I'll share really quickly. As a Mountain Collab, we supported the recycling infrastructure bill. There's a House and a Senate version. We did an op-ed in the Colorado Sun last year, I believe. And it has passed the Senate now and is awaiting action in the House. So that was really good. But it provides a lot of infrastructure for recycling in rural areas, which obviously affects all of us. So, and the one thing I'll say, Mike, to your point about, like, would it have passed if your name hadn't been on it? Maybe. But the fact that you keep going back to the legislature and your representatives, and they build trust with you, and there's a relationship there, that's when you really start to get success, because they know you and they trust you, and they know that you're not going to bring stuff to them that's going to be detrimental to them, and that's actually going to help your business. So I think that consistency, the redundant and boring, is really, really important.
Yeah, Fritz Bratcher with Vail Resorts, and I think much of the same from our side. So the only thing I'd add would be kind of build on that of, I think our industry, both with NSAA, series, I mean, like we had the opportunity, maybe an outsized voice in terms of just recognition and passion with, our guests, our communities. And I think we all, I'll speak to Vail Resorts, we work a lot with our elected officials, whether that's state, national, local levels, on things unrelated to climate all the time, right? And I think those relationships that we have, we're able to then, we sign into letters, we do all these things publicly, but there's a lot of behind the scenes work with those specific elected officials in the Senate, the House, whether that's at the national level or the state level, that maybe we don't always see eye to eye on climate stuff, but we're able to at least use those relationships we've built on other things like public lands, things like that. I'm thinking of Utah as an example, some of those senators, and able to advocate in the back. Maybe it moves the needle, maybe it doesn't, but I think that consistency of seeing our brands and our voice gives confidence to folks. I agree in Colorado, but it wasn't that long ago that I think even Polis wasn't as comfortable coming out with some more progressive and initiatives. And I think you see brands that people trust and believe in behind it over and over again. And I think that builds confidence in those electeds to do that. So yeah, I think we have an outsized opportunity. I think we do a great job as an industry with NSA helping.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing those different perspectives. So I think some of you touched on this in that last question, but climate advocacy is not always easy. It's not without its challenges. So it would be great to hear from some of you, what are the challenges your ski area has faced and how have you faced them? And Bonnie, I'm hoping to start with you on this question.
Thank you, Courtney. Where I was going to go on this is something that you already heard a little bit about, and that is the challenge of being in a state where, although our Montana Constitution provides that Montanans have a right to a clean and healthful environment, in 2023, our governor passed a law that basically precluded government agencies from considering the effects of climate in their decision making, and it was at that time perhaps one of the most aggressive anti-climate laws in the country. And so that's the environment that I'm working within. Many of our legislators actually have ties to fossil fuel, and so it oftentimes feels like quite an uphill battle. But it was, I look at some of the youth in the room, and it was our youth that saved us through the action of 16 young people that took the state to court in Held v. Montana and really did battle for our right to a clean and healthy environment and the state's responsibility to step in and help us assure that that happens in their actions or through their actions. And so that's kind of the challenging environment that we're working within, yet also it holds so much promise for the future of where we're going to be able to go.
I think challenges, oh gosh, they're far and wide. I would say one, because we are in New Mexico, is a challenge, to be quite honest. We don't have the influence like the Colorado ski areas do, and we're a pretty small industry in New Mexico. So I think that is part of it. I think there's a lot of education then associated with that that we have to do to advocate. So I would say those are probably the kind of two challenges. We just don't have a strong industry association like California, Colorado, some of the other areas, regions in the country have, and that just becomes really challenging, and we tend to have to lead in our region. So I think there's just a lot of education, and that just takes time. And I think to Fritz's point, it's about creating relationships in other areas, and whether you're participating in other working groups on various things that is either around, it could be associated tangential to environment, but on you create those relationships with a variety of folks that you lean on to try to help with that education as well.
I mean, I think some of the biggest challenges really are the fact that it's often way outside our comfort zone, like most folks at ski areas have worked at ski areas, the times I've done in-person advocacy at the Colorado State House or other places, it's like, well, like, do I really have to wear a tie, and like, and then I never do, and usually that's fine. But I don't know. I think that's a real challenge for, especially, Bonnie, the question you asked, are there folks who are just new to this, or you don't work even for a ski area, but it might be part of a bigger company? We're all used to shoveling snow and waking up early to try to ski and ride powder, so sometimes it's hard to just change your sort of focus to, approaching a conversation differently than you would with your internal, other coworkers or, any of kind of those logistical barriers. But I guess what I'd say, which I know, we're probably going to talk about all of the great resources that we all tap into, but there are just so many, and there's so much support, right here in this room and between us in the industry groups, that even though it seems scary at first, it's really quite easy. And I mean, there's obviously barriers and there's setbacks, but I've never really felt much of a challenge to getting involved in advocacy, to be completely honest with you all.
No, thank you. And kind of off of that point, sometimes it is just about, Bonnie and I were discussing this, like taking that first step, and that can be the most challenging thing sometimes, but that can be empowering and lead you to more. Yeah.
For those that are new to it, one thing that I would recommend, because it worked so well for me, was to collaborate with an agency that's already very active in advocacy. And that first time that you're going to your state house, go along and watch what they're doing, listen in, and then go along with them the next time and actually stand up and speak. And that's a very easy way to ease into it and start that. It's taken that first step that's the hardest, and that's how I did it.
Yeah, thank you. And it would also be great, anybody from the Mountain Collab, just since you are located in a variety of states, different political spectrums and environments, are there any challenges from those experiences, you'd be willing to share?
Sure, and when I was thinking about this, I'll speak more from, the sustainability lens within our company or the Mountain Collab. I think one of the challenges, I've found over the years, and I think it's getting better, of maybe the perception of lack of advocacy, right, on the behalf of climate or whatever policy someone thinks is the right thing, and being okay in the uncomfortableness of being behind the scenes on a lot of this stuff. I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me is some of the most impactful things we in NSAA, the collab series, advocate for or against is actually policies at like the PUC level, the Public Utilities Commission level. Like, not fun, sexy to talk about stuff that, doesn't necessarily show up in headlines, but that's really what's moving the needle in a lot of places. So I'd say that, the uncomfortable challenge of maybe folks thinking you're not doing anything or we're not doing anything when in fact we are in the background, and being okay with that and not always having to kind of shout it from the rooftops, I guess.
Thank you. So there is one more challenge that I've heard mentioned that I'd love to get the panelists' thoughts on, and that's how do you navigate the complexities of aligning your climate advocacy efforts internally, like kind of inside the ski area? Mike, do you want to start off?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, at A Basin, we're really lucky that we have so much buy-in across the company, both our senior leadership team down to, day one employees who are coming in, and these young folks who are really motivated to kind of join us and do this work. But that said, we still have just the normal operational challenges that we all face, and it's sometimes an interesting dichotomy where, we're out there outside the ski area really advocating for like every electric vehicle that exists in the world to be on the road right now. And then we still have to have a fairly uphill battle sometimes when we replace a vehicle at the ski area to go get the viable, available EV option. So, I mean, we're still working on it every year. It's, I've heard the 2 steps forward, 1 step back thing mentioned in multiple sessions this week. We make progress every year. We have tons of internal champions, but it's a kind of a constant effort of always reminding folks there's another option, oftentimes just volunteering to go do car shopping for them, even though, we've got other stuff we're up to. But yeah, I think that sometimes is the biggest challenge, is that, and some of that is really well-founded. I mean, it's tough to run the businesses that we run, Fritz, you mentioned the full electric snowcat yesterday. We've tested them and they exist, but they're not 100% viable for A Basin today. That said, when we advocate for things like ACT2, which ups the state standards and really we think will accelerate basically research and development, that's how we're going to get a full electric snowcat that our groomers and our shop folks are happy with. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's certainly something that we experience for sure every day.
Yeah, I would echo that a lot internally. I think what happens, especially on the ops side, is people are just trying to get through each day, right? It could be you're grappling with, a huge snowstorm or lack of snowstorm and it's wind. Like I think I heard this many years ago at an NSAA conference, and it was like mountain resorts are really good at crisis management, and it feels like that's the way it is most days in the ski industry, at least on the ops side. And when you're in it, it's hard to have that perspective. And I know we've had to have some hard conversations internally to remind people, like, these are our values, and this is, and it could be on a variety of things, whether it's advocacy or, you know, environmental efforts internally. Like, why are we doing that? And it's also, I think a lot of the ops folks are looking at their budgets and are saying, okay, if I do this, even though it's not aligned with our environmental values, it's going to save the bottom line. And it's having that conversation with them. And that's something we've asked of all of our leadership team, is to just have the conversation so that we can talk it through. And we might still end up in the same place of that decision that they made, but at least we've thought about it and we're intentionally making that decision versus them just thinking about the bottom line, to be quite honest. So I think that's where we get internal friction, is when there's the financial and our other values kind of fighting against each other. So my job is to try to eliminate that friction.
That's a really good point, Dawn, is that developing that buy-in across the board is really what elevates your progress. So for us as a nonprofit ski area, we periodically revisit our mission statement and our bylaws to keep them up to date. So we've been in almost a year-long process of doing that. And as a nonprofit community ski area, it was really important to us to involve our community in that rebuilding and rephrasing process. And throughout that, it was fairly unanimous that sustainability was a core value that had to have a prominent place in our mission statement. So that's a really good place to be starting from, a really good foundation for us. And then, of course, like many ski areas, there's sustainability concepts contained in our job descriptions. And then also last year we created a team agreement that is more about our culture and how we work together. And there's a sustainability statement also within that team agreement. And then I think that our department heads do a really good job of bringing it down to the what's in it for me for our employees. So just as when we're approaching our legislators and trying to speak to not climate change itself, but a specific impact locally or statewide that we're trying to address, we can do the same with our employees. You know, Northwestern Energy just got approved for a 28% rate increase, and they're back at the table asking for another rate increase that could be as much as another 26%. So that impacts our guests, that impacts our business, and it impacts the affordability of living for our employees. So it's very easy when you educate and bring it down to the ground level for your staff of why we're doing what we're doing.
The internal advocacy, right? There's also the pressure you can put on vendors. So some of us work with Pepsi, and we said, we don't want single-use plastics anymore. They said, sorry, we can't do that right now. We came up with CirQ kind of as an intermediary step while they work on that. Our car partner is Subaru. We have said to them, we want electric vehicles. Doesn't work in every mountain community, unfortunately, right now, but we're putting them at some of our parks. So you can start to just put pressure on the people that you're doing business with internally to make them a little bit more climate conscious and more sustainable too.
Yeah, thank you for adding in that additional point. Yeah, and thank you to the panelists too. So this is something we've definitely touched on throughout this summit, but the importance of collaborating with other groups and creating these partnerships, especially in the climate advocacy work. So I'd love to hear from each of you, how have you collaborated on advocacy initiatives, whether it's with other organizations, stakeholder groups, with ski industry partners to amplify your efforts? And yeah, Bonnie, why don't you take the lead?
So again, with Big Sky, we collaborated on an op-ed about a year and a half ago, trying to reach out to our community and our state. And then again, with the Public Service Commission, that seems to be a target of a lot of my advocacy work in our state, mostly because they have an inordinate amount of power to either increase or mitigate our greenhouse gas emissions. So with that, we, along with 40 other nonprofits and other organizations and businesses, asked our Public Service Commission for a rulemaking that would require them to formalize the process of including climate in their decision-making when they're comparing utility propositions. In 2019, our utility, Northwestern Energy, came to the PSC with their 20-year energy procurement plan, and it had 0 new renewable in that plan. And that's just not acceptable. So asking them to consider climate change in their decision-making forces the utility. And you also have to understand that we are also, our utility is a monopoly utility, and so we have no choice in our power. And so that drives a lot of our advocacy work. So we went with that rulemaking request, and the PSC didn't act within the 60 days required, where they either need to accept or deny that request. And so the next step was Earth Justice and Western Environmental Law Center agreed to support the legal end of a lawsuit to require the PSC to respond. And so numerous nonprofit environmental organizations, but I think we were one of maybe only one other business that stepped up. And that was like a really brave thing for our board and a nonprofit to do. I went to the board. I had leading people from Montana Environmental Information Center come in and speak to our board. I wanted to be sure that they were going to be comfortable with taking that big a step, and we all agreed that it was what was necessary. And so, yeah, that's what we did.
Great. Gosh, I have a few examples. So one, I want to kind of highlight like the advocacy that Geraldine and Courtney do at NSAA. So one of the things, Geraldine reached out, our Senator Heinrich hadn't signed on to the SHRED Act in the session, and so Geraldine was great and said, hey, do you mind reaching out? And I reached out to Senator Heinrich's office, and they were like, we were just waiting to hear from ski areas. So that's such a simple, easy ask, and a way to collaborate in a way that like moves the needle really easily and quickly. So I wanted to highlight that. I think at the local level, we put together a community kind of resiliency group, and it's made up of all sorts of stakeholders. And so as part of that, it's really collaborating. We're still in our infancy stages, but it's everything from the hospital to a local bank to Kit Carson Electric, which is our electric provider, to a nonprofit called Renewable Taos. So we all are working together to put forth climate advocacy in our community. And I think that is where some of those relationship building comes into play, and actually being an advocate within the community. And we have a huge Halloween event every year, and we gave out LED light bulbs to the parents it's a big, like, kids thing, but we gave LED light bulbs with like energy efficiency tips for the winter. So that was one way that we can really advocate. It was made it a little fun, and you would not believe the parents were totally psyched to get something at the kids' Halloween event. So I think those are examples of building those relationships so that you can build on something. For instance, Kit Carson constantly reaches out when they are applying for grants for various efforts. So I think that is a piece where I think in Taos, we've really been able to support kind of a community collaborative, and that's an exciting thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I would mostly just add on to all of that. You know, we think one of the best collaborations that we work with is you folks at the NSAA and your partnership with Series, which helps really steer us to feel like subject matter experts when we walk into these meetings and don't just like have our jaw drop and, you know, whatever, have our knot tied, dirty shirt, ski boots, you know, leaving snowy footprints on the floor. So that's one that we've really leaned into, and you guys are so helpful with that. But yeah, locally, I think we've got some great examples. We also are really hyper active with our Summit County sort of planning groups and stakeholder groups. We're really active with High Country Conservation Center, which is our local nonprofit. I'm the board chair of that group right now, and we've had representation in that leadership for a number of iterations. And that allows us, I think, just to, continue to have our voice heard. You know, we work, we have folks at the ski area that are on our Summit Stage Transportation Board. So, you know, we can advocate for direct things like where and when we need routes to move employees to, you know, really the 4 ski areas in the county. And I know that there's reps from Vail and Copper at those meetings as well. You know, Jeff and I and our counterparts at Breck and Keystone have advocated somewhat successfully with our landfill to expand some of what's accepted in our compostable stream, which is a unique challenge for us because it's great that we have a local landfill at 9,000 feet in Summit County, Colorado that accepts food scraps and other compostables, but because it's at 9,000 feet in Summit County, Colorado, so many things that our guests and vendors expect to be compostable and meet our guidelines and break down don't. So, you know, we've had awesome, you know, give and take meetings with the county folks. A lot of it's begging. And then, you know, they slowly start to test new items and accept them in the waste stream, which is a win for us. So that's one cool example.
Yeah, thank you all. And I think it's so cool just to hear the different examples you all brought up, just to see the really impactful ways that you can take this work, and very fun ways too with the light bulbs. That's awesome.
You're supposed to give the parents beer.
Yeah.
Could have a koozie.
That's next year. So before I move on to some like forward-thinking questions, I just want to ask the panelists, are there any resources, advice, kind of extra things we didn't discuss already you just want to mention that might be helpful for our audience? Any kind of advice, that wasn't mentioned already, although there was a lot of great advice already discussed.
Well, I guess if you're a skier, I would for sure start with engaging with the NSAA, and then as your 1A step, maybe with your state organization. Because the NSAA is going to know all of the federal things that we need to be advocating for, and your state folks are going to know the much more local impacts that you can be talking about with your electeds. I think it's also really important to be involved at the more local community level, because again, even all of these federal guidelines do, you know, ride on the back of communities implementing them and businesses implementing them and municipalities starting to roll this stuff out. So I think those are 2 places you for sure need to start.
Yeah, I would add the local piece. I think it's really important to create those relationships. I think that's what is really powerful about mountain towns is we're all facing kind of the same constraints within small mountain towns. And what is great about this is we can all learn from each other, and I think we can do that within our communities as well. And that piece is really important because there's just we can't all do this by ourselves, right? And so whether I know our community foundation is in the audience today, right? Like really being able to bring people into that work and highlight it, but you know, it's the act locally, right? Help globally type of thing. And it's something I want to highlight that Jeff brought up the other day was, you know, we, for being small, and we do have an outsized influence, and that's really helpful in this work. So those are the 2 things I highlight.
I guess I would speak to bringing your avoiding the terminology is Bill Barron, if you attended his session. It's using terminology that is local, I guess, So if I'm approaching a legislator like Tester, I'm going to be talking in terms of water, agriculture, those types of benefits, So it's know your audience and cater to it. Speak your story. Stories are super powerful, and so cultivate stories that you can take with you as you approach people, whether it's at the local, state, or federal level. The collaborations, there's so many groups that we collaborate with at Bridger. The list is endless. Many have been mentioned already, but we talked local, we talked federal, we talked about our national organizations, but I think statewide, there's an importance at the state level because it doesn't, that idea of when it's super local, it's like you're kind of separated and you lose a certain amount of power. So it's joining those state organizations like Climate Smart Montana, where you have the power of communities joining in this statewide effort, I think goes a long way. And I think something that also helped me, or is just helping us advocate in general, is keeping a easily accessible current list of who your legislators are and how to contact them, and making that available to your staff. Many of the organizations that I collaborate with statewide, like Montana Environmental Information Center or the Northern Plains Resource Council, have great biweekly bulletins that come out and tell you what action is needed. So, those of us working in sustainability, we may be pulled in the waste direction and you're out there doing waste audits and it's really hard to focus. And so it's invaluable to have those organizations giving you calls to action, and then we push those out further through social media, and we have a huge size outreach. Bridger's not a huge resort, but we have 11,000 pass holders and more than that who subscribe to our Cold Smoke newsletter. So we usually try to mention a sustainability action or an advocacy effort that's coming up when those newsletters go out, and at least bi-monthly in our social media also let people know about meetings that are coming up that they should be attending to be better informed. And I just, as we've mentioned, our voice is so powerful, whether you're one of few ski areas in a state. It's still, when you think New Mexico, you think Taos. So we are a very, very important voice. Don't diminish yourselves. Don't hesitate to stand up and use it.
Yeah, thank you all. Those were great, and I do want to leave us some time for questions. But before that, I want to ask one final question to kind of wrap us up. How do you envision the role of mountain towns evolving in the broader movement for climate action going forward? And I know that's a big question, but if you can keep it brief so we can have some time for questions, that'd be awesome too.
Wow, I know, one of you are going to have to take
I mean, how brief? Yeah, I don't know.
Mark too.
Well, I don't know. I think, something that's really unique about mountain towns, and actually unique about Mountain Towns, this conference, is it's such a cool group of us here, ski areas, folks that work in the towns, folks that work in these nonprofits. It's probably a bit of a generalization, but many of the people that work in these towns and for these nonprofits probably got to town as a lifty or a ski patroller or something like that. So I think, we're talking about our friends here. We're working with our friends and our coworkers. So where mountain towns fit in the broader climate push, I guess, is I think flexing that unique sense of community that we all have. And again, that kind of can build on how outsized our voices can be. All of our towns have way smaller populations than some bigger, population center nearby, but I bet you most of the notoriety of our region or the drive for tourism and visitation is our teeny little towns and our, smaller, medium-sized companies. So that's kind of where I see it.
I'll give it a try. I think it's our different, what we learn by engaging in these actions and being able to share that learning and knowledge. I'll give an example. There's a lot of, we have a watershed working group right now, and New Mexico State University and Oregon State University are doing a lot of studies on the watershed. And the professor from Oregon State was like, you all sit at the kind of southern end of the Rockies, and we really feel like what we do here will help inform the rest of the Rocky Mountains. And so that's a very localized thing we're working on, but it's a bit of a, that information that all those learnings that hopefully come out of these studies, I think will help as kind of global warming kind of increases and things change along the Rocky Mountains. So.
No, thank you all so much. I know that was a very hard question to me to ask you to be brief on, but yeah, really appreciate those responses. And yeah, Fritz.
Very hyper focused to this conversation here. I think to Dawn's point of sharing the successes we're hearing, and what you just said about your rate increases for utility, that is wild. And then, shameless plug. I don't know if Adam Quinton's here, but one of the board members for Holy Cross Energy co-op that Vail and Beaver Creek, we were lucky to be able to be in, 80% renewable by the end of this year. And he stood up in an earlier session and called out 5% rate increase in the last 5 years over the time going to 80% renewable and on path for 100%. So I think if we can leverage that, or bring someone from Holy Cross up to speak to constituents up by you to show these aren't competing as much as we hear, right? How do we just share dollars and cents as an example of examples of success? So, yeah.
Yeah, any other thoughts on this one? Anybody want a microphone? Okay, yeah, so let's open it up to questions. We have about, I think, 7 or so minutes left.
I had a question about the rate increase. Bonnie mentioned that it was going to increase essentially 50% this year and another 26 next year.
6, but we know based on numbers economists have run that it's probably going to push to about 26 for the next request.
So I work in sustainability in Yellowstone, and in the national parks, there's please don't quote me on this or Google it. But there's a director's order, MTS director's order 34B, something along those lines, might be 32B, essentially saying that a concessioner in an electrical utility cannot increase the rate by more than 10% in any given cycle. Is there anything similar in the national forests, or is there because most ski areas operate in national forests? I'm just wondering if there's any sort of legislative lever that could be pulled to control rate increases.
Right. Maybe Geraldine could speak to that. I'm not aware of anything. And, for us at Bridger Bowl, we're partly private, partly Forest Service. So it really wouldn't impact us. And we're definitely a captive ratepayer of our utility. So we don't have any other options, Geraldine.
Hi, my name is Jack Crumpton, the mayor of Whistler, and I was interested in the bravery your board showed in that public utility decision. When I was first elected, one of the first things I did was write a letter to 21 oil and gas companies asking them to help us cover the cost of climate change. And we got massively divested in, pulled a bunch of conferences out of our town, which I felt like I was leading the parade, and then I looked behind me and the parade's gone because nobody was there standing with us when we were divested. And I'm wondering, do you think the owners of your companies have the kind of bravery that you're talking about if things get ugly, like divestment from skiing? And do you think your owners would stand behind you if you were to stay in the parade?
Well, our owners are our community because we are a community nonprofit. And our community is relatively solidly behind us. We're growing at a pace that we can hardly keep up with. And the parade's behind us.
Yeah, gosh, that's a hard question. I would say we don't really do that much business like Whistler does. We're relatively small, so I don't see that level of disinvestment in the ski industry. Certainly, I think our owner and our leadership also supports making sure that we are doing everything we can so that the resort is in existence, for the next generations to come. So those actions, while I don't know if I would have approached it that way, I probably would have approached it a little bit differently. But I think having conversations like having a just transition, especially in New Mexico around oil and gas, is really important. 40% of all the revenue for the state comes through oil and gas. So that's a really hard conversation that our whole state's figuring out. But things like trying to support HVO in a state that is, that relies on oil and gas, those are good conversations, and engaging in those types of conversations I think are really helpful, instead of just being like, we're pay us because you're ruining our snow. Essentially, I think is what I'm trying to differentiate. So leaning in and trying to, I think, I can't remember the session it was, but just having those conversations directly with like reaching out to Sinclair, which we did, allows to form those relationships so that you can then have a conversation about maybe something. Does that help? Yeah, Tommy, do you have something?
Question.
Oh, sorry.
As far as, delivering the summarization of potential legislation to your leadership, how do you go about that? As well as on the back end, how do you deliver, confidence to your leadership on potential backlash that could come from the public for signing on to some of these advocacy opportunities?
Yeah, so like when we get anything, either people approach us and ask us to sign on to something, right? So we do like a whole internal vetting before we do that. I don't just like go like, yes, of course, So we do, so it's not, I will raise it and we will have a conversation about it, and then we'll either choose to sign on or not to sign on. And regardless, I always thank the people reaching out to say, thanks for thinking of us. This is why we are or why we aren't going to sign on, just so they understand like where we're coming from. Did that answer your question?
All I'd add, Tommy, is I think more and more, at least in this day and age, so many of our leaders are, I think, more comfortable with some of that limited backlash, we might see on social media or something. And really the bottom line, Bonnie, you said it right when you kick things off, like, we're just advocating for what's best for our business and our employees, right? And folks who might echo the other side of that argument and come at us online or something, like, they may think they're doing that for themselves, but we have every right to push for what we believe is going to, continue our business and our way of life. So I don't think there's as much worry as there used to be, or even as there's perceived to be, that backlash really matters. Because overwhelmingly, I think our guests, at least for sure our guests, and I think you guys would agree, all agree with us.
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation. Actually, Bonnie brought up about, right, you also have to pick your battles.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's an example of, picking your battles, and I think values alignment around that is really important.
Yeah, that's something we were talking about this morning over breakfast, is that there's so many calls on our time, and advocacy is just a part of it. So the idea of picking your battles is NSAA and Geraldine generously supply these templates, and if I have certain congressional representatives that, depending on the topic, it's going to be a formality for me to send the letter, and I'm going to be more inclined to take a template, customize it a little bit, but not put a lot of time into it, but get the logo out there, get the statement out there, and then really devote more time to the causes where I feel like we can be more impactful, and spend my time really working on delivering that message and telling our story of why it's important to us.
Thank you. So I know we have more questions. I'm so sorry that we are at time, but please feel free to come up and talk more. But I think there's another session after this one, so I just don't want to hold up the room. But thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everybody so much for being here.